Is Ryan Day on the hot seat? It's a question that seemingly comes up every single season since he took over for Urban Meyer with the Buckeyes. So in today's video, I want to dive into the Ryan Day situation and tell you my thoughts on should he be on the hot seat, are the expectations for him at Ohio State fair, and my overall thoughts since it's such a hot topic because they just lost to the Ducks. Before we can make any crazy observations or takeaways or look at the critiques about Ryan Day, we need to just look at his raw resume numbers. He has done 5 seasons at Ohio State. He's headed into his 6th season, or he's in the midst of his 6th season at Ohio State. His record, 61-9. His record versus Michigan, which is a relevant stat, your main rival in college football, your record against them can sometimes determine how a fan base is feeling. And it's no secret, he struggled versus Michigan. 1-3 now and currently on a 3-game losing streak versus the Wolverines. He's got 2 conference titles, 3 college football playoff appearances, 1 appearance in the title game, a 1-3 college football playoff record, and 0 national titles. Now, just looking at this resume, you can see the pros and you can also see some of the critiques. Obviously, that record versus Michigan isn't very good. Obviously, 0 national titles and that playoff record, a little bit glaring, especially with the context that this isn't Rutgers he's at. This isn't Cincinnati. This is Ohio State. This is a program that holds themselves to a very high standard and was perceived to be in a really great position when he took over back in 2019. So the main criticisms of Ryan Day, broken down specifically, are that he has 0 national titles, despite the fact that he inherited an elite program. He's 1-3 versus Michigan in his career and on a 3-game losing streak, like I mentioned, and he appears to be headed in the wrong direction. Things appear to be going downhill. Their poll finish gets worse each season. They've lost a couple extra games each season. Seemingly, things are headed in the wrong direction. So let's address each one of these critiques around Ryan Day. The first, he has 0 national titles. Now, this one I kind of scoff at because here are the active coaches that currently have a national title in college football. Dabo Swinney, Kirby Smart, and Mack Brown. And that's the end of the list. It is extremely difficult to win a national title. And if you look at the amount of coaches that are active, that have done it, there are very few of them. And yes, Jim Harbaugh just left for the NFL and Nick Saban just retired. But even if you were to include those guys, that's still a very small elite group of coaches. You're talking about the tippity top tier. And of these, I know no Ohio State fan would want to swap out Ryan Day for Mack Brown. Mack Brown is pretty old, and it's clear as of this season, the game has passed him by. And then you've got Dabo Swinney, a guy that I guarantee you most Ohio State fans wouldn't want to swap for because Swinney refuses to use a lot of the resources at his disposal, like NIL and the transfer portal, and it's negatively affecting his team. People would argue they're headed in the wrong direction. So the only real one of these 3 is Kirby Smart that I think Buckeyes would be willing to do a 1-to-1 swap for. Another relevant data point that I want you to look at, and get ready for this, it's a little bit of a crazy graphic, but we'll break it down. But basically, it takes a while and sometimes doesn't happen when a blue blood program loses a legendary head coach. They don't typically just bounce back and win a national title. Here I have a list of all of the national champions from the last 20 or so years that had a championship coach leave, and then how long it took for them to win another national title after that coach left. There's some gaps in here for the years that Nick Saban was at Alabama because obviously he was doing his own thing and wasn't leaving year to year. But in any case, you look back at all of these, when was the next national title for a lot of these teams? A lot of these teams, after their coach leaves, it takes a long time, if ever. Only 3 of the teams on here have won a national title since their coach left. That was LSU after Nick Saban left. They won with Coach O back in 2019. Jim Tressel left at Ohio State. They won under Urban Meyer in 2014. So even from Jim Tressel to Urban Meyer, it took them 12 years to figure it out and win a national title. It's been now 10. We're in the 10th year since they won that last national title. And you just look at the gaps here. Nebraska hasn't recovered as a program since Tom Osborne left, and they went through a bunch of coaches after that. Tennessee and Phil Fulmer, they think they have their guy in Heupel finally, but it took a long time to get here. Miami hasn't recovered as a program. USC hasn't recovered as a program. Texas is just barely starting to recover as a program. So if you're picking up what I'm putting down here, it's really hard to take over a program after a legend. We're seeing Ryan Day attempt to do that right now, but historically speaking, it's almost impossible to take a program like that and instantly have them back in the national title conversation. The second big critique on Day is that he's 1-3 versus Michigan, which I think is valid. You need to beat your rivals, and yeah, they've lost to Michigan. But Jim Harbaugh, I think, is the perfect example of why Buckeyes fans should probably have a little more patience when it comes today, because Harbaugh didn't figure it out and beat Ohio State until year 7. Year 7, and he didn't win the national title until year 9. Ryan Day is in year 6 right now, and I'm just saying, if you look at what happened with the Wolverines and how at a certain point things looked bleak under Harbaugh, and then they just trusted him, and they wrote it out, and eventually they were rewarded, it should be a sign that maybe you should be willing to do the same thing with Ryan Day, especially if you're in a position to win a title every single season. The third criticism on Ryan Day is that things appear to be headed in the wrong direction, but I actually think things are just fine. Yes, technically, record-wise, you could make the argument that things have regressed based on playoff appearances and overall record. Last year they end up losing the Cotton Bowl to Missouri. That could be defined as a low, but the way he's been able to sustain this program from what he took over, I think is pretty impressive. If you look at the last 4 seasons under Urban Meyer, Ohio State lost to Iowa, Purdue, and Michigan State. That is relevant because Ryan Day has not done those things. He has not lost those bad games. They went 0-1 in the CFP during those last 4 years under Urban Meyer and missed the college football playoff altogether. Those other 3 seasons, they were beating a Michigan team that averaged 3.5 losses during that 4-year span. So yes, it was still a Jim Harbaugh team, but it was not the same Michigan program. They did not hit their stride until essentially the second year of Ryan Day, which has been a rude awakening for Ohio State. But to act like Urban Meyer's success against Michigan is just apples to apples to what Ryan Day has gone through is just crazy talk, because it was clearly not the same Michigan team, and a lot of that I think is going to get remedied this year because Ohio State is clearly a better team than Michigan. They're going to beat Michigan, and then all of a sudden that record against Michigan gets a little prettier just because they played a significantly worse Michigan team. With all the negativity around Ryan Day, I think people often fail to highlight what he does well. He's an elite recruiter, he does not lose to bad teams, and they've been in the national title hunt every single season, which I think some fans take for granted at Ohio State. Being an elite recruiter, he takes over in 2019. From 2019 up until the 2025 class, which is still building out, the recruiting rankings have been the following: 7. It was a little rough in his first year. There's a bit of a transition, but then he goes 5th, 2nd, 4th, 3rd, 1st. Elite recruiting and talent acquisition, not an issue. Ohio State is still doing that at a high level, and I know people might argue, we could do that with any head coach. Okay, why don't you go test it out then with another coach? But that's something that I think elite programs take for granted. And I just showed you the graphic before of how long teams would have droughts after losing an elite coach. That's always the first thing to go, is their recruiting falls off, their talent acquisition isn't as good anymore, and they struggle. Number 2, he doesn't lose to bad teams. Here's a list of the 6 programs that Ryan Day has lost to in his career at Ohio State. Some of them multiple times. Michigan, it's been a couple. Oregon, it's been a couple. And those are the only ones, actually. Only those 6 programs. The one that's questionable here that you could say isn't a great program is Missouri, but Missouri won 11 games that season and was in the Cotton Bowl, so they were having a great year. But outside of that, I mean, these are all pretty elite programs as of late. Clemson, Bama, Michigan, and Georgia all won national titles during that span, and this is the class of the sport right here. Yes, you can argue that this is him losing big games and he needs to be better. I agree. I think a lot of coaches struggle in these big games, and you can say that about a lot of coaches. In fact, Dan Lanning at Oregon is literally a guy that had the criticism he couldn't win in big games. At a certain point in his career, Dabo Swinney at Clemson had the same critique. So did Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. And so for Ryan Day, I think the sign of a great coach, he never loses to bad teams, and consistently at Ohio State has not done that. If he were to start doing that, my opinion of him would drastically change. And number 3, they're in the national title hunt every single season. And I know there are Buckeyes fans out there that are saying right now, we could do that under any head coach. That's an expectation. Being in the hunt isn't good enough. Well, I'll tell you what. That's not true. I can guarantee that. And I bet you if Ohio State makes a rash decision and fires Ryan Day, they'll learn, yeah, things can get worse. At elite programs, I feel the thing that happens very frequently is these fans think about how it can be better. How can we win a title every year? How can we do what Nick Saban was doing at Alabama? They very oftentimes fail to think about how it could get worse. And that is my fear for Ohio State fans, is they're going to get too greedy and want to be in a position to win a title every year when it's really not possible. I think Ryan Day will win a national title at Ohio State. It's something that I've said, and I still still believe and stand by. When it doesn't happen in a given year, I don't have outrage and think that's insane. Ohio State is in the race every single season. They're high in the odds. They're in the playoff most seasons under Ryan Day. And it's just a thing where I think people get increasingly frustrated they haven't won a title because they just forget to realize how rare winning a national title is. And I think Ryan Day will get there eventually. I have faith that he'll do it. But those are my thoughts on Ryan Day. Thank you for watching this video. As usual, if you enjoyed, go ahead, like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And a little bit of a different video, me basically defending Ryan Day, talking about how he shouldn't really be on the hot seat. So let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are on Ryan Day. Do you think he's a terrible coach? Do you think he's a great coach? Do you think he's overrated, underrated? Whatever you think, let me know down in the comments. I'd be happy to spar with some of you, as I'm sure you would enjoy as well. But that's all I got, and I got some more content coming out this week, so I will see you guys later this week.